In the 409th year of the long record, on a prison moon called Caldera Hold, a human woman with both arms broken and one eye swollen shut was asked, for the last time, a single question. She had been in our hands for 81 days. She had survived 96 sessions of a method that no living mind in 900 years had survived past the third cycle. And when the confessor general leaned close to her ruined face and asked her, quietly, almost gently, where she had hidden it, Captain Greta Solano Embeki did not answer. She laughed. Then she lifted her shattered hand toward the open recording lattice, the same lattice that fed directly into our central archive, the same one I am reading from now, 3 centuries later, and she transmitted a single burst of corrupted symbols. 17 rows of them. No one in the chamber understood what they meant. No one understands what they mean today. And as the restraint field began to tighten around her throat, she looked into the lens that every Thren citizen would eventually watch, and she said 7 words. It's already gone, dig anyway, forever. Then the field closed, and Greta Solano Embeki was dead. That burst of symbols is now the single most studied object in the history of my species. It has consumed more research hours than the discovery of faster-than-light transit. It has bankrupted 3 noble houses, founded a religion, and broken the careers of more archivists than I care to name. It is believed to point toward the location of what our own records call the richest single haul ever taken from a Thren vessel, a fortune so large that, to this day, we cannot agree on what it would even be worth. And in 400 years, with every tool of decryption my civilization possesses, no one has ever solved it. To understand how a human ended up dead on a Thren scaffold with the location of an empire's fortune locked inside her skull, you have to go back. You have to understand who she was before any of this. Because here is the part that I, as the archivist assigned to her case, find hardest to write down. She was one of ours. Greta Solano Embeki was not a raider. Not at first. Not for a long time. She was a licensed cartographer in the employ of the Thren Shipping Authority, and by every measure we use to judge a useful life, she was a success. Understand what that meant. The humans we had absorbed into the lanes were, in our assessment, a minor species clever with their hands, short-lived, emotionally unstable, useful for the kind of detailed survey work our own people found tedious. We did not fear them. We employed them. And Greta was the best surveyor in her sector. She mapped the deep freight corridors that kept the eastern arm of the empire fed. She held a clearance rank that most humans never touched. She had quarters with a window, a salary paid in full guild script, and a commendation from the authority itself. Etched on a plaque she reportedly used to prop open a ventilation duct. There is a recording of her from those years, an orientation address she gave to new surveyors. She is calm, precise, a little bored. She tells them that a good map is not a picture of where things are. A good map is a confession of where someone thinks you'll never look. We laughed at that line back then. We thought it was a quaint thing for a small, clever creature to say. I want to be clear about something, because it matters to the whole story. We did not make Greta Solano Embeki into a pirate by mistreating her. We did not starve her or beat her or steal her wages. We gave her a comfortable life and asked only that she keep doing the work she was extraordinarily good at. That is what makes her case so difficult for my people to accept even now. She did not break under cruelty. She broke under a single order, given politely, on a routine afternoon, with all the proper paperwork attached. And she broke in a direction none of us could have predicted. For 11 years she charted our lanes, and somewhere in those 11 years she fell in love with the one thing the work could not give her openly. Not the maps, the hunt. You have to picture the Tesher Drift to understand this. It is a collapsed trade corridor on the ragged edge of our space, a place where, centuries before Greta was born, a stellar event tore apart a major shipping route and left behind a graveyard. Thousands of wrecks, whole hauler frames drifting in slow rotation, cargo pods scattered across a region you could lose a fleet inside. Officially, the drift was off-limits, unmappable, not worth the loss of vessels it took to survey it. Greta surveyed it anyway, on her own time, for years. She was not supposed to. She filed the routes she found under false corridor numbers and buried them in the authorities' own archive where no Thren auditor would think to look, hiding her best work inside the very system meant to watch her. She found passages through the drift that the Empire did not know existed, channels between the wrecks where a small ship could move unseen and unscanned. She was, by any honest accounting, the only living being who truly knew the inside of that graveyard. And she told no one. She just kept hunting, kept finding the routes nobody wanted her to find, kept the maps in her head and out of her reports. I have read the psychological assessment our confessory ran on her, posthumously, trying to understand. The assessor concluded that Greta Solano Embeki had been, for at least 8 years before she ever broke a single law, already living a secret life inside the Empire's blind spots, that the surveyor we trusted had quietly become something else long before we noticed. The loyal employee and the outlaw were the same person, and we had been signing her commendations the entire time. The assessor's final line reads, "Subject was never ours. We simply had not yet given her a reason to leave." We gave her one. In the 401st year of the long record, the shipping authority issued a revision to the cartographer's code. A small thing, administratively. A new cargo classification, to be logged and routed like any other freight. The revision ran to 9 pages. Greta would have read it at her desk, with her window and her plaque and her full guild script salary. The new cargo class was living beings. People. Populations the Empire had decided to relocate from worlds it wanted for other purposes, sealed into hauler pods and moved along the freight lanes like grain, and the surveyors were ordered to chart the most efficient routes for moving them. We did not think of it as cruelty. I want you to understand that because it is the center of everything. To a Thren, a cargo is a cargo. The relocation was lawful, the paperwork was correct, the routing was simply an optimization problem, and Greta Solano Embeki was the best route optimizer we had. She read the revision. She did not file a complaint. Because there was no one to complain to and nothing in our system that would have understood the complaint. Instead, she did something we had no procedure for. She burned the maps, all of them. 11 years of secret drift surveys, deleted from the archive in a single night so thoroughly that our recovery teams never restored more than fragments. She stole a survey cutter, a fast, lightly armed thing built for charting, not fighting, and she flew it into the one region in the Empire where she knew, better than anyone alive, exactly where no one could follow. She vanished into the drift, and within a year the drift began to give back. It started with a freed pod. A relocation hauler reported a sealed population pod missing after transit through a drift-adjacent corridor, simply gone, its tracking dead, no wreckage. Then another. Then a hauler taken whole, its crew set adrift in a life pod with their translators removed, and a single message burned into the hull. The buzzard sends her regards. Her own people gave her the name. The humans she pulled out of those pods watched her ship come in fast and loud and merciless on the approach, watched her cutter dive on a hauler the way a carrion bird dives on something it has decided is already dead, and they called her the buzzard. She kept the name. She painted it on the cutter. She found others like herself. A former hauler pilot named Yuki Halloran who became her first mate, and who, by every account, never once raised her voice, which somehow made her more frightening than Greta. A gunner named Priya Donnelly who had lost a sister to the relocations, and who the Thren casualty reports describe, with rare emotion, as relentless. And a strange figure the records call the priest smuggler, Tomas Kraus, who moved freed populations through routes even Greta didn't know, and who never carried a weapon, and never explained why the Empire's scanners couldn't find his ship. In 2 cycles, this small crew of the species we had dismissed pulled apart 40 Thren vessels. 40. That is not an exaggeration drawn from legend. That is the figure in our own lost ledgers, signed and stamped. And every one of those vessels was a relocation hauler. She never touched a freight ship, not once. We did not understand that at the time. We assumed she was a thief who simply preferred the relocation routes because they were poorly defended. The idea that she was choosing her targets by who was aboard rather than what was aboard, that did not occur to us. It could not occur to us. We did not have the concept. That failure of imagination is going to matter enormously by the end of this story. Hold on to it. It could not last, and it didn't. In the 403rd year, a Thren-line cruiser named Unbroken Tally caught the Buzzard's cutter against a wreck field with nowhere to run. The cruiser was 40 times her mass and carried weapons her survey ship was never built to survive. By every model we ran afterward, she should have died there. She lost the cutter. She lost most of what she had taken. Yuki Halloran was wounded. Priya Donnelly was separated from the crew and presumed dead, wrongly, as it turned out, though that is another story. Greta herself escaped in a life pod with 11 people and almost nothing else, drifting deeper into the graveyard while the Unbroken Tally logged her as a probable kill and turned for home. This is the moment, in nearly every record I have ever read of any raider of any species, where the story ends. Stripped of ship, crew, and fortune, the outlaw either dies in the dark or crawls back to beg for amnesty. There is no third path. There has never been a third path. Greta took the third path. She went deeper, not toward the edge of the drift, where rescue or surrender waited, but into its dead heart, the oldest wrecks, the region so thick with debris that our own navigation systems refused to plot it. She took her 11 survivors into the one place the Empire had written off entirely. And in that dead heart, in the ruin of the corridor we had abandoned centuries before, she found the thing that turned her from a problem into a legend. She found where the relocations ended up. It was a hauler, the largest class we built, a sealed relocation vessel, the kind that moved not pods but populations, 10,000 people at a time, locked in cold transit. It had been caught in a drift storm, the same kind of debris cascade that had killed the corridor in the first place, and it had limped into the dead heart with its drive cracked and most of its systems failing. It was sitting there, crippled, blind, waiting for a repair fleet that the Empire, for reasons buried in some accountant's ledger, had never bothered to send. The records call this ship the Sovereign Tithe. Among treasure seekers it has another name, whispered with reverence, the Guilt Manifest, because of what it was rumored to carry. You have to understand what a relocation hauler of that class meant to my people. It was not just freight. The Empire used these vessels as moving vaults. The relocated populations were assets, and the manifests that cataloged them were among the most valuable documents in the imperial economy, sealed and encrypted and worth, in pure accounting terms, more than entire colony worlds. To capture an intact sovereign tithe with its manifest sealed was to capture, in our own terms, a fortune that the imperial treasury could barely calculate. The legend says the manifest alone was bound in a casing of solid imperial guild metal, so heavy it took 3 people to lift. The legend may be true. We will come back to the legend. Greta took it without firing a shot. I want to be precise here because this is the part that humiliates us most. The sovereign tithe was crippled but not defenseless. It carried a security detail and functioning point weapons. But its crew, seeing a battered life pod limp out of the wreck field, assumed it was one of their own survivors. They opened the bay. Greta and her 11 walked aboard a vessel carrying a fortune. Through a door the crew opened for them, and by the time anyone aboard understood that the small, clever creatures coming through the airlock were not refugees, it was already finished. It was not a battle. It was barely even a robbery. It was, as one of my predecessors wrote in the margin of the original report, like leaving the treasury unlocked and the guards asleep, and then expressing surprise that the treasury was empty in the morning. She took the sovereign tithe. She took the guilt manifest. She renamed the hauler and sailed it out of the dead heart as her own, and for a brief, impossible season, Captain Greta Solano Embeki, the cartographer with a window and a plaque, was the richest outlaw in the history of Thren space. And then she could have stopped. This is what so many of my colleagues cannot get past, because the Empire offered her a way out, and it was a good one. In the 404th year, with the legend of the sovereign tithe spreading through every port on the eastern arm and 3 separate noble houses demanding her capture, the authority did something it almost never did. It offered amnesty. The terms were simple and by our standards generous. Surrender the guilt manifest. Hand over the sovereign tithe. Give the empire back its fortune and walk free, no trial, no confessory, no scaffold. A full pardon, recorded and sealed. She sent a negotiator. The negotiator carried the empire's terms back to her, deep in the drift, and waited for her answer. Her answer was no. Not a counteroffer, not a haggle over price. Just no. She would not give back what she had taken. And then, before the empire could even register the refusal, she did the thing that turned her from a wanted criminal into a ghost. She vanished. The sovereign tithe was found, eventually scuttled in a deep wreck field, stripped, its drive cold. But Greta was gone. The manifest was gone. The crew was gone. For nearly 6 years, the richest outlaw in Thren space simply ceased to exist. No raids, no sightings, no ransom demands, nothing. 6 years, while every house and every confessory and every bounty broker in the empire tore the drift apart looking for her. 6 years, while the fortune she had refused to return sat somewhere, in a wreck, in a vault, in a cipher inside her skull, and the empire spent more hunting it than it had ever been worth. And here is the question that has tormented my people for 300 years. What was she doing in those 6 years, with all that time and all that fortune and all that silence? We did not get to ask her, not really, because when we finally caught her, she had already decided that the only thing she would ever give us was a laugh and 17 rows of symbols. They caught her at the system's edge in the 409th year, far from the drift, alone. The bounty cruiser that took her reported almost no resistance, a tired human in a small ship, going somewhere quietly, who surrendered the moment the weapons locked. The crew thought it was a mistake. The buzzard taken without a fight. They half expected to find an impostor. They found Greta Solano Embeki, and they brought her to Caldera Hold, and they brought her to the Confessor General. You should understand who the Confessor General was, because his presence in this story is not incidental. He was the highest practitioner of the only art my civilization has ever truly worshipped. The Thren do not build monuments to our artists or our generals. We build them to our confessors, to the certainty, refined over 900 years, that there is no mind that will not yield, no secret that cannot be drawn out, no silence that holds past the 3rd cycle of the method. It is the foundation of our law, our economy, our entire understanding of power. We do not need to trust because we can always extract. The Confessor General had personally broken 4,006 minds. His record was unblemished. Every mind yields. It is carved over the entrance to the confessory in letters taller than I am. He began with her, certain it would take a day, perhaps 2 for a creature this stubborn. It took 81. And on the 81st day, having failed for the first time in his long and decorated life, having pushed the method past the 3rd cycle and the 9th and the 30th, the Confessor General asked her the question one final time. And Greta Solano Embeki laughed and reached for the recording lattice with the last working part of her body and gave us the only confession she would ever make. 17 rows of symbols, it's already gone, dig anyway, forever. You already know what happened next. The symbols are the heart of it now, so let me tell you what we actually have. The burst she transmitted resolves into 17 rows of glyphs drawn from a Thren substitution lattice, a cipher form our own clerks used, ironically, to encode shipping manifests. In principle, it should be trivial. A substitution lattice is among the simplest things to break, given the key. In practice, no one has ever found the key. The arrangement she used corresponds to no standard lattice in any imperial archive. Cryptographers have spent careers proving that it is internally consistent, that it is a real cipher, encoding a real message, and not random noise, and then spent the rest of those careers failing to read it. And here I am required by the standards of my office to tell you the part that the treasure seekers hate. It is suspicious. The cipher was not in the original Caldera hold record. I have read the original transmission logs, and the 17 rows do not appear in the contemporaneous account of her execution. They surface in the archive 80 years later, attached to her case file by a clerk whose own records are incomplete, in a subarchive that historians of my profession describe, charitably, as unreliable. There is no mention of the guilt manifest in any treasury document from the years she supposedly held it. There is no mention of the 3 people to lift it, casing in any source written by anyone who claimed to have seen it. The famous gallows laugh, the 7 words, these appear first in a popular dramatization produced more than a century after her death, by a studio known for inventing exactly this kind of thing. So a careful archivist is forced to ask, did Greta Solano-Embeki really hand us an unsolvable map to a hidden fortune in her last living act? Or did someone, decades later, decide that the richest outlaw in our history deserved a richer death than the truth provided, and build her a legend out of forged symbols and borrowed drama? I have asked myself that question for most of my career. I will tell you at the end what I believe. But first you should know that the question has never stopped anyone from looking. It has not stopped anyone at all. The first of the great seekers was a disgraced fleet admiral named in our records only by his house cipher, who had commanded one of the cruisers that failed to catch her, and who spent the rest of his life convinced the fortune was hidden in the dead heart of the drift. He dug for 30 years. He sank his entire house fortune into excavating wrecks, hauling debris, mapping the very channels Greta had once charted in secret. He found pieces, a logbook, a weapon, a scuttled hauler frame that may have been the sovereign tithe herself, stripped to nothing. He never found the manifest. He died in the drift and his descendants are still digging. After him came the cult. On Caldera Hold itself, among the descendants of the prison moon's keepers, a belief took root that Greta's cipher was not a map at all but a kind of judgment, that the 17 rows would reveal themselves only to one who was, in some untranslatable sense, worthy. They still keep her cell as a shrine. Pilgrims come to press their hands against the lattice she transmitted from. Some of them, I am told, weep. And in the modern era came the researcher, a Thren academic, credentialed, serious, who in the 490th year published a full proposed solution to the cipher. She claimed the 17 rows encoded a set of stellar coordinates pointing to an uncharted wreck on the far edge of the drift. Her work was rigorous. Portions of it are still cited. But she could never obtain a permit to excavate the site, and by the time the permit dispute was resolved, she reported that the location had already been disturbed by unauthorized digging. Whatever was or wasn't there is gone now, churned and scattered. Her solution remains officially unconfirmed, which is to say, another door that opened onto another empty room. Pieces, hints, suggestive fragments, wrecks that almost match, coordinates that can't be checked. In 300 years, the seekers have produced everything except the one thing they are looking for. So where does that leave us? There are 3 possibilities, and I find each one more frustrating than the last. The first is that the fortune is real and still out there. That Greta Solano-Embeki did hide a hauler vault of imperial wealth somewhere in the drift, that the cipher genuinely points to it, and that in 300 years no Thren mind, for all our certainty that no secret can be kept from us, has been clever enough to read the last message of a human cartographer. The treasure waits in the dark, exactly where she left it, behind 17 rows we cannot crack. The second is that the fortune was real and she spent it. 6 years is a long time to stay invisible. Invisibility is expensive. Bribes, false identities, ships, the silence of a great many people. Perhaps the guilt manifest was slowly broken up and traded away across those 6 years until there was nothing left, and the cipher was Greta's final joke, a map to a vault that had already been emptied by the only person who knew where it was. And the third possibility, the one my colleagues find most likely, and the seekers find unbearable, is that there was never any cipher at all, that a forger built it 80 years on, that the manifest legend grew in the retelling, that the gallows laugh was written by a studio, and that we have spent 3 centuries and 3 fortunes chasing a hoard that a dramatist invented to give a dead woman a better ending. I held the third view for most of my life. It is the responsible view. It is what the evidence, soberly weighed, supports. And then we found the sovereign tithe. 11 years ago, a salvage operation working the deep wreck fields of the Tesher Drift recovered the remains of a sovereign-class relocation hauler, scuttled and stripped, its identity confirmed beyond dispute by its drive signature and its partial hull registry. The sovereign tithe was real. It existed. It was crippled in a drift storm, exactly as the records say, and it was taken, and it was scuttled in the dead heart of the graveyard, exactly where the legend places it. The ship at the center of the whole impossible story turned out, after 300 years of doubt, to be solid metal and verifiable fact. The salvors recovered over 3,000 artifacts from the wreck: hull plating, a logbook, the casing of a manifest vault, the same vault the legend said took 3 people to lift. They opened it. It was empty. Not looted, not broken into. Empty in a particular way, the seals intact, the records inside not stolen but erased, wiped down to nothing by someone who had the codes and the time and chose to leave the casing behind to be found. The guilt manifest, the most valuable document in the eastern arm of the empire, the fortune Greta Solano Mbeki died refusing to surrender, was gone. Deliberately. Permanently. And that is when I understood. That is when an archivist who had spent his whole life believing in the responsible view finally read the case the right way around. We had been asking the wrong question for 300 years. We assumed the manifest was a fortune because to us it was a sealed catalog of relocated populations, an asset, a vault of value. We assumed she hid a treasure because we could not imagine her wanting anything else. But Greta Solano Mbeki never raided a single freight ship. She only ever took relocation haulers. She only ever opened the pods. And the manifest she died protecting was not gold and was never gold. It was a list. It was the names and the locations of every person the empire had sealed into the dark and written off as cargo. And in the 6 silent years we spent hunting her fortune, she was not spending a fortune. She was emptying it, opening pods, moving people through routes only she and a weaponless priest-smuggler knew. Erasing the manifest one name at a time as each name walked free, so that, when the empire finally caught her, the great vault it tortured her for would contain exactly nothing, because she had already given it all away. The cipher does not point to a hoard. There is no hoard. The 17 rows, if they are real at all, point to nothing, and that was the gift. She handed the most certain civilization in the galaxy a puzzle we could not resist, knowing we would pour 3 centuries of effort and 3 fortunes into digging up empty wrecks, while the people she had freed slipped further and further beyond our reach. The treasure hunt was the weapon. Every Thren excavating the drift for gold was a Thren not looking for the freed. It's already gone. Dig anyway, forever. We are still digging. I told you to hold on to our failure of imagination, all the way back at the beginning, and here is what it cost us. We are a people who built our entire understanding of power on a single certainty, that every mind yields, that anything hidden can be extracted, that strength is measured by what you can take out of someone who does not want to give it. We carved that certainty over our doors in letters taller than I am. And it never once occurred to us that there might be a kind of being whose strength is measured the other way, by what she could hold, and what she could withhold, and what she could give away so completely that we would never, ever get it back. The Confessor General broke 4,006 minds. He understood every one of them because every one of them was, at the core, trying to keep something. He did not understand Greta Solano Mbeki, and he never could have, because by the time we caught her she was not keeping anything at all. There was nothing left in her to extract. She had already spent it. That is why she laughed. We had brought the full weight of 900 years of certainty to bear on a woman who had already won. And we tortured her for 81 days trying to take a fortune from someone who had nothing left to lose, because she had already given everything away. So the question that has tormented my people for 3 centuries is not, in the end, where is the treasure? The wreck is real. The manifest casing is real. The vault was opened and it was empty, and we know now where the contents went. They went out into the dark, into freedom, into lives we will never trace, scattered down channels a cartographer charted in secret and burned before she left. The real question is the one I am not supposed to write in an official record, and so I will write it here at the very end where my superiors may choose not to read it. Did a single human, a surveyor with a window and a plaque, look at the most certain civilization in the galaxy and decide that the best way to defeat us was not to fight us but to give us something to dig for, and then dig and dig and dig for 900 years until we forgot what we were even looking for? Because if she did, then that laugh on the 81st day was not defiance. It was the sound of someone who had already won, watching the losers carve her riddle over their own door and mistake it for a treasure map. The anime your historians keep comparing this to, the human story about a pirate king who tells the world at his execution that he left everything in one place. Find it if you can. I am told it predates our contact with your species by centuries. I used to think that was a coincidence. I don't think that anymore. I think your people have always known this trick. I think you have been teaching it to each other for a very long time. And I think Greta Solano Mbeki simply ran it on a civilization that had never heard the joke. If you followed this case to the end, the cipher is still in the public archive. 17 rows. Go ahead and try. I should warn you, though, we have been trying for 300 years. There was never anything there.